Welcome. Welcome to all of you. I am Jim Sailstrom. I'm Jan and Verge's middle boy. I grew up in Central America, Nebraska. When I was a child in Kearney, Nebraska, on the Great Plains, I learned about Buffalo Bill, and I learned about his life, his Wild West exhibition, and what a great showman he was. I visited Buffalo Bill's Grave and Museum in Golden, Colorado, where I learned of the amazing places Buffalo Bill performed and of his many accomplishments. I have had some interesting experiences traveling the world as a musician. I have played in arenas for 18 to 22,000 people. I have played outdoors for hundreds of thousands of people. I met John Denver at the Red Rocks when I was 16, and I have been in Dolly Parton's band off and on since 1979. John Denver was a superstar. Dolly Parton is a superstar. But our country's first superstar was Buffalo Bill. He performed his Wild West show for 30 years, and millions of people all over the world saw it. I want to share a few stories of Buffalo Bill's life. William Frederick Cody was born in LeClaire, Iowa, February 26, 1846. His family moved to Leavenworth, Kansas. Now, back in the day, for a cup of brown sugar, you could trade for an Indian pony. Every little boy and girl in Leavenworth had a pony. Billy's father, Isaac, died when Bill was very young, and Billy had to support his mom and his sisters by working on a wagon train. At the age of 12, he was already making trips from Leavenworth to Salt Lake City. By the age of 13, he was part of the gold rush to Colorado. And by age 14, he was not only working for the wagon trains, but he was also working for the Pony Express. Young Billy learned how to tend herds of oxen for the wagon trains and also scout for buffalo. He became an expert at feeding the wagon trains and later scouting for the Army and the Union Pacific Railroad. Billy was exposed to Indians at a young age. He respected their values. He learned their sign language. He liked the Indians. He was scouting for a wagon train through some dangerous Indian territory. He saw some hostile Indians headed his way. He had incredible eyesight. He rode quickly towards them, stopped and unrolled a blanket. He then offered the chief a peace pipe, offering the smoke to the four winds. It was obvious to Billy he was in serious trouble. He knew the Indians would kill him and then kill the settlers on the train. So using sign language, he convinced the Indians that everyone on the train had the Black Death, the plague. The Indians knew better than to go near the settlers, and this is one of those dime novel stories that made Buffalo Bill famous back east. He also might have been the youngest rider for the Pony Express. The Pony Express only lasted a year and a half, but Bill Cody might have kept their legacy alive through reenactments that were performed in his Wild West exhibition. Bill might have traveled the longest distance of any rider, 322 miles at the age of 14. For 30 years, they told the story of changing horses every 15 miles and traveling through dangerous Indian territory.
It is such a joy to be here at Lookout Mountain at the Buffalo Bill Museum with Steve Freezin. Steve Freezin is the curator, and he is the man that knows more about Buffalo Bill than anybody on the planet. It is just great being here with you, Steve.
It's great
Thanks
having
a million.
you here, Jim.
Thanks a million.
Great. I'm enjoying the music.
You know, I just wanted to ask you a few questions to tell us a few stories about Buffalo Bill. And he was such an original American and our first superstar. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline and where he was when it came to being in the West?
Well, it's interesting because he grew up in that West that he portrayed in his Wild West shows. He wasn't just a celebrity, wasn't just a showman. He was the real deal. He was the genuine article. And that's one of the reasons people went to the shows. They knew he was genuine, and they knew what they saw would be genuine as well. So that just opened up a wonderful picture for the visitors of a Wild West that was gradually, well, actually rather rapidly disappearing.
On a pony named Prince, he rode across the West, from Leavenworth to Salt Lake, all across the Great Plains, He loved the western winds as a scout for wagon trains. Called the Indians by name, he called them friends. He loved to ride in the meadows and the valleys by the rivers. He loved to ride, he loved to ride in the mountains and the prairies. Buffalo Bill is still real for you and me, and he loved to ride. His vision was to show the world he came to know. The western plains were wild but disappearing. Kings and queens all came to see the Wild West staged, and to shake the hand of Buffalo Bill and Annie Oakley. He loved to ride in the meadows and the valleys by the rivers. He loved to ride, he loved to ride in the mountains and the prairies. Buffalo Bill is still real for you and me, and he loved to ride. It was on July 4th, 1882, in North Platte, Nebraska, Buffalo Bill's Wild West became a reality. He wanted to show how mankind became a civilization. It was actually our nation's first rodeo. July 4th, 1882. Rehearsals in Columbus, Nebraska happened after that in the spring of '83. And on May 17th, 1883, the very first Buffalo Bill's Wild West exhibition happened in Omaha, Nebraska. And that's my hometown. They traveled by train to St. Louis and Ohio and Pennsylvania. In New England, they met Mark Twain. Mark Twain planted seeds saying, Europeans would love your show. They would love it because it really represents the American spirit of the West. And it was an amazing thing. It took about 4 years for Buffalo Bill to have that dream come true. But he headed to New Orleans for the winter. It was going to be warmer down there. And they made it to New Orleans. They had a big parade through the city, and it was beautiful. The sun was shining, and there was a big cotton festival there. And for the next 44 days, it rained. Any hope of drawing people to the show was, it was squashed. The Wild West lost $60,000, but there was one golden thread. They met Annie Oakley. She was 25 years old, and her real name was Phoebe Ann Mosey, and she was the most incredible shot anyone had ever seen. Annie Oakley was born in 1860 in Darke County, Ohio. She was an incredible young lady. She was 5 feet nothing. She was 5 feet tall. She always dressed like a Victorian lady, very proper, in a dress, never in pants. And she was married to Frank Butler, who was also a sharpshooter, but he could never beat her. Nobody could. She was incredible. If she ever missed a glass ball, but they started out with real pigeons. They got rid of the real pigeons because that was a little messy and ugly. They went to glass balls filled with feathers, and she'd shoot those. If she missed one, she had this little pout, and everybody could see it. 15,000 people in the arena could see her little pout. And then the next ball they'd throw up, she'd hit it. And then she had this little kick that she made, and she was so endearing. And by the way, they came up with clay pigeons not too soon after that, right? And the Wild West exhibition was responsible for that. She was loved by everyone in the troupe. Buffalo Bill loved her. Sitting Bull joined the exhibition. He called her Little Miss Sure Shot, and everybody loved her. They thought maybe she was living on the lemonade that they provided for all the workers when they were setting up the tents and tearing down all the exhibits. They thought maybe that's all she lived on because she was so tight. But what was really true is that she was frugal, and a lot of people didn't know that she supported 16 children from infancy through college, from being babies all the way through college. She paid for it. She just didn't tell anybody about it. And the Queen of England loved her. She said, "You're a very clever little girl." She used to shoot a cigarette, the ashes off the end of the cigarette, out of a dignitary's mouth. And so Kaiser Wilhelm came from Germany, and she shot the ashes out of his mouth, and he loved it. He came back the next year and he said, do it again. And she said, I don't think I like you. I'm not going to do it. And years later, after World War I happened, she said in a book, if I would have just aimed 4 inches to the right, I might have stopped World War I from happening. But the black community loved the show, and they related to the American Indians. The black community had never been in the Mardi Gras festival, and they dressed as American Indians, and in the next year, they were allowed in. They borrowed chants and rhythms of the American Indians, and some scholars believe the Wild West influenced our jazz music, which of course influenced rock and roll. Listen to this tune they wrote a year after Buffalo Bill's exhibition. How cool is this? He's not a man, he's a loving machine. Talking about They arrived in Paris 1890 for the Exhibition Universelle, and for the next 6 months, they played the exhibition in Paris. They were also wowed on Bastille Day to be some of the first folks to go up the elevators riding to the top of the Eiffel Tower with Eiffel, and also with Thomas Edison. Buffalo Bill's friendship with Thomas Edison led this to becoming the first large production to use electric lighting. And it was just amazing. The Indians loved Eiffel Tower. Princes and queens and kings and anybody that was famous in the day in Europe came to see the exhibition. The King of Siam came. He wanted to buy Annie Oakley. He offered Bill $50,000. And Bill went to Annie Oakley and said, that's a lot of money. And she said, you wouldn't dare. And he said, no, of course not. Paul Gauguin, the famous artist, saw the show many times. Gauguin bought a Stetson hat, and we have these paintings, these selfies of him in Tahiti wearing the Stetson hat. He told his pal, Vincent van Gogh, about the shows, and here's a real interesting story. Vincent van Gogh was a depressed artist in the south of France, and he'd been hanging around these 2 teenagers. The teenagers were always kind of harassing him and tormenting him. The teenagers had seen the Wild West exhibition in Paris, and they went out and they bought fringe coats and Stetson hats and a rusty pistol. And on the way home one day, they accidentally shot Vincent van Gogh in the stomach, and he died 70 days later. He wouldn't rat him out. He wouldn't say what had happened. And he just told Theo, this is best for everyone. In 1956, the little boy was on his deathbed, and he explained that he had been tormenting Vincent and accidentally shot him, and he didn't want to go to his grave with that. That's a pretty interesting story, huh? The Wild West toured the rest of France. They went into Germany. They saw all the cathedrals. Then they went up to Italy, and Buffalo Bill wanted to perform the exhibition at the Colosseum in Rome, and he didn't realize that you couldn't really do anything on the floor because it was all buildings and stuff. So he was a bit disappointed with that. He had an audience with Pope Leo XIII. Pope Leo gave him a medal. They moved on to Verona, to the Colosseum in Verona, and there's an incredible photograph of the Wild West exhibition with Mount Vesuvius smoking in the background, the giant volcano. This was about 1905. So needless to say, around the turn of the century, William F. Cody was the most recognizable American, and his star was just beginning to rise. So in 1883, Buffalo Bill and his adopted son Johnny Baker, Nate Salisbury, John Burke, and Ned Buntline, they all went to Chicago, and they went to be a part of this Columbian Exposition in Chicago. When the Exposition Fair decided not to allow the orphans and poor children to attend, Buffalo Bill sponsored a free day just for them. He called it the Wave Stay, with free food and admission. He endeared himself in the world to this incredible experience, and the place was packed. The Wild West was open on Sundays, and after suffragist Susan B. Anthony heard this, she said, I think my 10-year-old son could learn more at a Buffalo Bill Wild West than in church. Sorry, pastors, reverends, and priests. By the end of October, 4 million people, yes, 4 million people had seen the show, exhibition, and the profits were in the neighborhood of $1 million. That's what Buffalo Bill took back to North Platte, $1 million. That would be like $37 million today. Buffalo Bill returned to North Platte. He was a wealthy man. He bought his wife Lulu the biggest house, and he invested in the future of the West. He had investments in housing projects in North Platte. He owned 2 ranches, and he owned incredible amounts of land in Minnesota, and he invested in mining companies and oil companies. He built 3 hotels near Yellowstone Park, and he built the Sheraton Inn. He was an amazing man. Buffalo Bill teamed up with James Bailey from Barnum and Bailey's Circus. Barnum and Bailey had stock and wagons in Europe. Buffalo Bill had stock and wagons in the U.S. If they traded, they could use each other's outfits and not compete with each other. His dream came true, and about 250 actors and cowboys and Indians, later 650, sailed from New York to England on the steamship, the State of Nebraska. Buffalo Bill influenced a lot of people in his life. When Bill met Bram Stoker in London, 10 years later, Bram Stoker wrote a novel. And in the novel, there's a character named Quincy Morris who wears fringed buckskins and carries a big Bowie knife and tries to stab Dracula in the heart. Yes, Bram Stoker wrote Buffalo Bill into his famous novel, Dracula. The book Black Elk Speaks defines the Sioux Indians, and Black Elk was a member of the troop. Chief Irontail was a good friend, and Bill arranged the chance for Irontail to be the model for the Indian head buffalo nickel. I keep telling my friends in the music world, the Wild West exhibition played Madison Square Garden 30 days in a row, for 25 years in a row. 30 days in a row, 15,000 seats, 10 shows a week, for 25 years in a row. Do the math, it'll amaze you. There are 59 pages of cities and states and countries that the Wild West exhibition played. And on that website for Buffalo Bill's Grave and Museum, you can find this list. Check it out. See if Buffalo Bill played your town. There's a good chance he did. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor for bravery in the Indian Wars. It was taken away from him because they claimed he was working as a scout and not part of the Army, that the government saw the error of their ways, and it was returned to his family in the 1970s. On January 9th, 1917, about 100 years ago, Buffalo Bill was very ill and asked to be baptized in the Catholic faith. The next day, January 10th, with Lulu by his side, he apparently said, "Let my show go on." He was so famous that within hours of his death, both the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, and the King of England, George V, had cabled in condolences. By the turn of the 20th century, William F. Cody was the most famous American in the world. No one symbolized the West for Americans and Europeans better than Buffalo Bill. Every American president from Ulysses Grant to Woodrow Wilson consulted him on matters affecting the American West. He counted among his friends such artists and writers as Frederick Remington, Thomas Edison, and Mark Twain. Tens of thousands came to his funeral at the state capitol in Denver, and then his burial on Lookout Mountain above Golden, Colorado. Buffalo Bill invented rodeo, supported cowboys and Indians, sold 1,700 different dime novels, and thanks to his shows, exhibitions, millions of people got a feel for the American West. As Annie Oakley put it, he was the simplest of men, as comfortable with cowboys as with kings. Goodbye, old friend. The setting over the mountain will pay tribute to the resting place of the last of the great builders of the West, all of which you loved, and part of which you are. Annie Oakley, Phoebe Ann Mosey, passed away November 3rd, 1926. Will Rogers, who loved her, sent this comment: "Whenever I think of Annie Oakley, I stop and say to myself, it's what you are, not what you are in, that makes you." I want to leave my story here. I believe that I would have really liked Buffalo Bill. I think you would have too. I hope you've learned a lot more about Buffalo Bill, and I hope you'll keep the fires burning by reading more about him. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you very much, Buffalo Bill, for your incredible life story.
Buffalo Bill was William F. Cody, a Kansas farm boy, an Army scout, an Indian fighter, a Buffalo rider, first American showman who broke out. Western novels for a dime, Western stories for all time, the Battle of Bighorn, tragic glories, with the Army forts and trains, and the pioneers' great plains, the audience shared a Wild West story. Buffalo Bill was William F. Cody, a Kansas farm boy, an Army scout, an Indian fighter, a Buffalo rider, an American showman who broke out. Annie Oakley, Sitting Bull, Black Elk and Iron Tail sailed the oceans like United Nations, and the Wild West exhibition gave the world an education. The Eiffel Tower and Thomas Edison. Buffalo Bill was William F. Cody, a Kansas farm boy, an Army scout, an Indian fighter, a Buffalo rider, an American showman who broke out. Buffalo Bill was William F. Cody, a Kansas farm boy, an Army scout, an Indian fighter, a Buffalo rider, an American showman who broke out. American showman who broke out. Bury me above the prairie, on Lookout Mountain, I'll look out. An American hero, Buffalo Bill, the American Wild West scout. Indian fighter, stagecoach driver, Eiffel Tower bright. Pony rider, entrepreneur, Pony Express overnight. Fringe buckskins, Stetson hats, rodeo on parade. Indian nation, women's rights, how our nation was made.